Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Marijuana legalization. Many believe it's not a question of if, but when. But is taking it off the streets and putting it in the stores really safer and better? My co-host Wajahad Ali is here. He's bringing in all of your live social media, as usual, into the program. Waj, a number of people, including one of our guests tonight, believe that if the current approach to legalizing marijuana doesn't change, we could have a public health crisis on our hands.
Indeed, but more Americans are inhaling, and our community is buzzing about tonight's show. I promise no more puns. Please, I had to get that out of the way.
Please, okay, you're killing me.
I had to do it. But before about the consequences, Suzanne says she sees a weed Narnia, a weed utopia happening. She goes, it will be legal, sold like fine wine or Cuban cigars, and a great source of revenue. There will be bars and cafes. However, on the flip side, David says, criminalization isn't a solution to addiction. A big problem, Lisa. The rich and middle class get treatment, and a lot of people are also tweeting in about the effects it will have on children.
Yeah, worrying if it will increase addiction among kids. Colorado and Washington were the first two states to greenlight the sale of marijuana for recreational use, and now, from Kentucky to Arizona, a number of others may be following in their path. But is there a right way and a wrong way to go about this, as entrepreneurs look to capitalize on what promises to be a very lucrative industry? Some argue that in the race to buy and sell drugs legally, regulation and oversight are mere afterthoughts, leaving open the possibility of a public health crisis as one of the unintended consequences. Joining us to help talk this through is Cheryl Schumann, a marijuana entrepreneur and self-described Martha Stewart of marijuana. Mark Kleiman is a professor of public policy at UCLA and the author of Marijuana Legalization, What Everyone Needs to Know. Mark's written extensively on this topic. And Michael Gordon is the CEO of Kush Tourism. That is Seattle's first company to provide marijuana tours. Thanks to everyone for being here. So Cheryl, you know, you look at the trends, you look at the polls, and it is really true. A lot of people do believe that it's just a when, it's not an if. Some people estimate in the next decade or two. From your perspective, where is this conversation at right now in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's actually going to happen much sooner than people realize. It's my belief that by 2016, we're going to be seeing an estimated revenue of $47 billion. And
it's from $32 billion now, so you're looking at a huge increase in just 2 years.
Yes, and I think, you know, they're looking at Colorado as the great experiment, they're referring to it as, and I think that it's, in my opinion, it's quite evident that it's a huge success. The demand was so great that within the first week, the retail outlets were actually sold out. So in my opinion, when you realize that there is a tremendous public acceptance, we're at record rates of acceptance and approval throughout the country, and when you realize that people like me, a corporate woman who's also a mom with 2 beautiful daughters, you know, I've used it personally and it worked for me. And I think this is really a rebranding campaign. Marijuana got a bad rap back in the 30s, and now the truth about it's coming out. And it's a miraculous plant. I believe that if it were discovered today in the Amazon jungle, it would be referred to as the next superfood and miracle drug. And I think that America is waking up to the possibilities. And to me, that's very exciting because we're making history right now. We are witnessing the end of cannabis prohibition as we sit here.
So Mark, Cheryl mentioned Colorado. You've said that pretty soon you believe that presidential candidates are going to have to be grappling publicly with this issue. And your advice to them is to say, I'm not against all legalization, just against dumb legalization. What does dumb legalization look like?
Looks like what we're getting now. Alcohol model, taxes that look high but turn out to be low when the price of cannabis collapses. Very low prices leading to much more heavy use by adults and much more use by minors. Regulations that don't amount to much, aggressive marketing, people trying to make a lot of money selling a lot of weed. The problem with the legal cannabis business is you can't make money selling cannabis except by selling it to people who smoke too much. People who smoke a moderate amount of cannabis simply aren't very good customers. And so we're going to develop a whole industry that's dependent on people who are dependent on cannabis, just as we have in the alcohol industry. So I think the right question is not if or when, but how. And I think there's fairly obvious ways to go forward with high taxes, tight regulation, maybe state monopoly, certainly a user set quota that will help people from having their habits slip out of control. And we could eliminate the costs of prohibition, which are huge, and not run into a big increase in drug abuse, which we're otherwise going to get.
So, Michael, Mark mentions this idea that the people that you're going to be selling to are the people who are already addicted. You run Seattle marijuana tours. Talk a little about that. Are you concerned that you are going to be just perpetuating an addiction that already exists among a significant portion of the population?
You know, I don't think our tours are involved with addiction at all. It's not something we focus on. What we do is we provide an opportunity to see the industry behind the scenes. So really what we're showing is that it's a legitimate industry, and we're providing the information that shows, hey, these are glass blowers. They've been doing it professionally for 25 years. You know, maybe they blow pipes, but they also do pendant work. They also do artwork. And I think it's really important to provide these hands-on experiences to continue to normalize marijuana in Washington.
Our community has really responded about the negative consequences of Weed Incorporated. And J Nintendo T says, I don't want Monsanto growing marijuana, adding God knows what chemicals to it, and Walmart selling it for a few bucks cheaper. Amy says, I'm concerned about big businesses getting a hold of marijuana farms and adding addictive chemicals like they did to tobacco. Lucas says, I would like to see competition laws that allow small businesses in the industry to thrive. And Cheryl, I'm going to go to you with this. I mean, should we be concerned that marijuana will emerge, if you will, like big tobacco? I mean, is big weed necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I think that a lot of what you're describing right now on social media is quite frankly ignorance and a lack of education, and that's why we fight so hard to educate people. When you look at the business models, for example, in Israel and Portugal and so forth, when prohibition has basically been lifted and cannabis is readily available, I don't see any issues with big tobacco right now. What I'm seeing is a lot of American families that see that this is the greatest opportunity to realize the American dream. When you realize that so many Americans across our country are losing their homes, losing their jobs, and I see amazing families, amazing corporate people coming into this sector and realizing that this is the green rush, this is the .com boom. And in fact, I see just the opposite. I see some of the most outstanding entrepreneurs across this entire country coming out, building businesses, and they're creating the American dream. So I think that a lot of this is just educating people about who we are as not only cannabis consumers, but who we are also as business people. And what you're going to find is there are a lot of mainstream business people who are entering this market. I know for me firsthand, I was a corporate businesswoman for decades, and then I got cancer and everything changed for me. I was one of those people that felt much the same as prohibitionists, that, you know, cannabis is bad. And then I realized, I woke up one day and I realized I'd been lied to. And I started using it as a medicine, and it saved my life. So I feel like I have a moral and ethical obligation to literally educate the world from people who have misunderstandings about this plant. And I believe that, you know, the evidence shows that this is less addictive than alcohol, less addictive than pharmaceuticals, and less addictive than tobacco. And when you consider that someone dies in our country right now at the rate of 1 every 19 minutes from alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical overdoses and issues, and to this date, after thousands of years with cannabis, zero. There have been 0 deaths ever attributed to cannabis. So,
I'm sorry, that's not correct.
No, I disagree, but.
All right, but facts remain facts. There are 0 deaths from acute cannabis overdose. That doesn't keep somebody from getting stoned and wrapping his car around a tree. Doesn't keep somebody from getting stoned chronically and developing lung disease. Of course there are deaths, right? There's 0 acute overdose deaths from tobacco. It's also not true that Portugal has legal cannabis sales. It has no such thing. Portugal simply stopped arresting users, which is probably a smart thing to do. So the claim that we've seen this somewhere else and it's worked, I'm sorry, it's not the case.
I'm curious as to what studies that you can show that indicate that there actually have been deaths attributed to marijuana use. Can you quote any study, any one?
Take a look at the fatal alcohol reporting system, fatal accident reporting system, right? It's a record of all fatal auto crashes, and in a substantial fraction of them, the driver was impaired on cannabis.
Michael, I want to get back to the business aspect of this. You know, Cheryl was just talking about alcohol and tobacco and pharmaceutical companies, and they capitalized on alcohol, tobacco, and drugs because there was a lot of money in it, and there's a lot of money in cannabis. It's a $32 billion illegal industry right now, and if it becomes legal, you can bet that that's going to increase substantially. Are you concerned?
I'm sorry, it'll actually decrease quite a lot because legally it'll be an extremely cheap drug.
Okay, but Michael, are you concerned as an entrepreneur and as a business owner that big corporations are going to take this out of the hands of the little guy and are going to capitalize on it for strictly commercial purposes?
You know, one of the things that Cheryl brought up when she was talking about the entrepreneurs behind the cannabis industry is that a lot of us believe in cannabis as a medicine. And that's where recreational marijuana is starting from, is everyone who's involved in the industry has been providing this as medicine, and they believe in it. Sure, we're seeing the emergence of companies who want to be the Budweiser of cannabis. And, you know, behind the scenes, we're actually seeing people shy away from that, especially in the state of Washington, where the state is saying you can only have X number of producer or processor licenses. We're really trying to keep big business out of it because everyone's so passionate about what they're doing in this industry. I think it's really paving the way for the new world. You know, we're all taking footsteps to normalizing cannabis and making sure we do it in a responsible way.
Well, Cheryl, you know, we should distinguish here. We're talking about recreational marijuana versus medicinal marijuana. Why should a pharmaceutical like medicinal marijuana be legalized for recreational purposes?
Well, this is a very specific issue with the cannabis plant itself. Cannabis has been proven to be helpful in a multitude of various illnesses. And then when you speak about recreational use, I like to refer to it as responsible adult use, as a safer alternative to alcohol. And also as a woman, I personally prefer cannabis, even if I didn't use it medicinally, because I don't like the calories associated with alcohol, nor do I like the hangover the next day.
Aren't you worried about getting lung cancer, though?
Absolutely not. I've looked at studies, I've talked to my own doctor. In fact, I have a condition that's called acute pulmonary histoplasmosis, which is a lung disorder. What I find repeatedly day after day is instead of using albuterol, which I use for my asthma and histoplasmosis, I find that cannabis actually works as a superior, not only mood stabilizer, but as a bronchial expander. So I can actually breathe much easier than I ever could with any pharmaceuticals for my lung disorder.
All right, well, coming up, does marijuana make you a better parent? One of our guests makes the case for it. That's next. Welcome back. We're talking about what many believe is the inevitability of the eventual legalization of marijuana for recreational use. Understandably, it has some parents concerned, but not our guest, excuse me, Cheryl Schumann. Cheryl, not only do you not worry about this, you actually believe that smoking marijuana makes you a better mom.
There is not a doubt in my mind that cannabis makes me a better mom, and quite frankly, it makes me a better human being. It really does. Well, you know, when my children were growing up, I remember in 1996, the very first time I tried cannabis, I hate to say the typical mom, but I was stressed out, I was overworking, I was a single mom, I had been prescribed anti-anxiety, antidepressants, and was basically left as feeling like a zombie. I went from coaching soccer and being very active in my kids' lives to literally feeling that I was at the point of suicide. I just felt like my quality of life was so poor that I felt like I didn't want to go on. And it was my psychiatrist and MD in 1996 that actually prescribed medicinal marijuana for me. He had his own garden, and he said, look, I'm a doctor, I could go to jail for even telling you this because the laws are just passing, but cannabis is a superior mood stabilizer. So I tried it for the very first time, and within 2 puffs, I went from being Susie Straight to being probably the best mom I think I've ever been in my life. And my children will be the first to tell you that once I started using cannabis as an alternative to all the pharmaceuticals, they got their mom back. And I can tell you, I'm the very proud leader of a group called Moms for Marijuana, and we have over 150,000 women all across this country that feel exactly the same. They feel that cannabis makes them a better mom, and it's our duty to educate those people, including my daughter. Our business model is a mother-daughter team, and my daughter believes so strongly in this that we're about to take our company public and be the very first billion-dollar company in this sector.
I want to bring in Ben Court into our conversation. Ben, you're on the board of directors for Project SAM, or Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and you are also a recovering addict and the director of outreach at the University of Colorado Hospital. Are you concerned about increased addiction going hand in hand with increased legalization?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's inevitable. The addiction rates will stay the same. If you start smoking weed after the frontal lobes totally develop, so that's somewhere between 23 and 25 years old, your chances of developing a clinically diagnosable addiction are about a 1 in 11. If you start pre-18, that drops down to about a 1 in 6. So when you have more cannabis users, you absolutely will, and in Colorado we are, seeing quite a bit more addiction associated with it, yes.
And when you've got 150,000 moms, and that's a conservative estimate, I'm sure, who are smoking cannabis, It's not just about the message, but the example that it's sending to the kids. Are you concerned about that?
Well, that's the big thing, and I mean, far be it from me to judge another parent. I've got 3 kids myself, and I know it gets a little wild sometimes, but the reality of it is that the single biggest contributor to youth use is the perception of risk. And as parents, we play very, very important roles in how our children perceive the risk around them. So as we, as a society, normalize the substance, accept it, and make it mainstream, the kids don't think it's a big deal. You know, you got more kids in Colorado schools right now who are smoking weed than are smoking cigarettes. You've got a minority of high school juniors in Colorado who think that daily use is a bad thing. So yeah, we're sending a pretty mixed message to our kids right now.
The community is asking, what about the children? We said there are regulations that keep tobacco and alcohol companies from marketing to kids. Should there be something similar, Lisa? Anonymous says, absolutely. Just saying, in my honest opinion, there's no need for traditional marketing. It's liked or it's not. Sheldon disagrees. He goes, nope, we are promoting safety of concerned patients. Legalization will help. Hashtag Save Mexico. And you know, I said, as the industry grows, do you think businesses providing the drug have a responsibility? And Saval says, I don't see how, other than compliance with label laws, are there any? And quality control guidelines to ensure purity and strength. And Mark, I want to go to you with this. Look, are we promoting profit over responsibility here? If we normalize, promote, and advertise what is still an illegal drug to children, are there going to be some negative consequences here?
Yeah, I would not draw the distinction between cannabis and alcohol. I mean, I don't hear anybody calling for the recriminalization of alcohol in order to protect the children. And I don't think anybody can reasonably doubt that cannabis is a less dangerous drug than alcohol. The problem is not cannabis, the problem is out of control use, which is a problem for a minority of cannabis users, as it is for a minority of alcohol users. And what we ought to be doing is getting kids ready to control their own behavior. That's a much harder task than telling them to just say no. So I don't think the argument that we have to keep marijuana criminal to protect kids takes us very far. On the other hand, I think that the open commercial market at low prices is going to be maximally attractive to kids. So that's the reason I think we need to maintain price and control the flow of marketing information. We can make it illegal for the legal vendors to sell to kids, and that's all well and good. As we see in the alcohol market, that just means that the kids will get it from people who are old enough to buy it.
Ben,
you can't really cut it off.
Wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mark. You know, the listener who wrote in and said that this would be like having fine wine bars and cigars, it couldn't be farther from that in Colorado. And as far as I know, I think I'm the only person on the ground in Colorado who can tell you exactly what's happening. And it's more like, you know, malt liquor in a 40-ounce and Mad Dog 2020. This is stuff that is aggressively marketed to young people. I have a PowerPoint that's just full of photos with cartoon characters selling marijuana, with half-naked women, some of them with cartoon characters sandwiched in between them, selling marijuana. You know, that's not being sold to the distinguished, occasional, responsible users of the world like Cheryl. That is very, very clear marketing towards young people. And what we've got to do is just clamp down on this marketing, because it's completely out of control in Colorado. 20% off with student IDs, free T-shirts when you buy an eighth. And to Mark's point about the lower price, the second biggest contributor to youth use, you can get an ounce of weed in Colorado right now with a red card still, but a medical marijuana card. You can get an ounce of weed in Colorado for $50 right now. That's nuts.
Cheryl,
so I'm hoping. Sorry, let me just say. I'd really like to hope that Sam will branch out a little bit and join those of us who are calling for higher alcohol taxes to protect children from alcohol abuse. It's just crazy to be against cannabis and not against anything else.
I would happily call for higher alcohol taxes, higher tobacco taxes, and unfortunately this conversation has kind of you know, stolen the spotlight from anything else. I feel like we're spending a lot of time nationally on this, and yeah, there's some other very significant issues that we should be looking at, and certainly we know that there's a direct relationship between higher cost and higher taxes are the easiest way to achieve higher costs and lower youth use. So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to see all of that stuff taxed all to hell.
Cheryl, when Ben was just going through this list of how these products are marketed to kids, we saw the cartoon banana. I mean, it reminds me of the old Joe Camel cartoon days decades ago. What responsibility do people getting into this industry, especially getting into it in such a big way like yourself have to draw those very clear lines in the sand?
Well, I'm actually glad that he brought it up. On some issues, I actually agree with them. You know, I have a marketing and PR business, and we specialize in branding. In fact, we've branded and successfully launched over 1,700 businesses in the cannabis sector. So I do agree that when you ask what about the children and what about it being marketed to children, I agree on that issue, that I don't believe that the way these groups are marketing is correct. Most of the time, these are smaller operators, which quite frankly are recovering drug dealers, or that they were dealing marijuana in college, and they are trying to market to the college crowd because that's their peers. But what I'm seeing is someone who operates a professional marketing agency, and I should say the only branding agency in the cannabis sector. What I'm seeing is people like myself, people who come from the corporate world. We're not half-naked chicks in bikinis like saying let's get high. We are basically looking at this as a pure business model to professionalize it, to class up the joint, so to speak. And for us, you know, when we talk about tourism, you know, I listen to these Budweisers of beers and all this kind of sort of thing, and what I look at is the fact that we're looking at a $100 million hedge fund to expand these fine dining combination Soho House type Grand Havana Room, private cannabis vaping lounges with a 5-star meal, where you're dealing with literally the affluent of society.
How many of those
1%.
investors smoke pot? What percentage?
I'm under an NDA and I can't disclose that. But no, I will tell you this, it's been very interesting, because I've seen anything from Saudi princes to CEOs of companies who say, look, I'm a burner, which means they're a cannabis consumer, and I live in an illegal state or an illegal country, and I would give anything to be able to consume cannabis in the privacy of my own home or in a fine dining facility, and they're dying to come out of the closet. And then there are other people from the Wall Street sector or investment bankers that look at me and they'll call and they'll say, hey, look, I don't know anything about marijuana, how it works, but I know that there's money to be made here, and we want to get in on the beginning.
All right, well, working under the assumption that marijuana will eventually be legalized across the country, what needs to be done now to avoid dangerous pitfalls? We're going to discuss that next. Welcome back. We're talking about whether in America's rush to legalize recreational marijuana, important steps are being skipped that will be essential to controlling the drug and addiction. Wash, our community has a lot to say about doing this the right way.
Indeed. Richard says tax it and make sure the funds go towards community mental health and education. Stephen says restrict the sales to persons over 18 years, create smoking zones for marijuana, and license the dealers and shops. Atlas is concerned about the kids. He goes, the education of our kids, that's what matters. There must be a comprehensive effort between public, private, and social sectors. And I got to get this tweet in from Vern. I know that many talk about the medicinal benefits, but what's wrong with just getting high? People love to talk drunk stories.
Ben, what's smart policy from a health perspective right now moving forward?
Exactly the opposite of what we've done in Colorado. We opened up the retail market and the mass commercialization of a drug with almost no checks and balances in. We have we've regulated almost nothing. You know, you've got our smoked marijuana has 20 to 30% THC. The world has never seen smoked weed that strong. Our concentrates are 80 to 90% THC. You know, they're smoked in the same way that crack is, on a superheated needle or by hot knifing it. What we should have done at the beginning of this thing is really, really clamp down on that. If you want to look at some interesting policy, and I think very telling about what this debate really is about, take a look at Alaska. I absolutely don't think that anyone should ever go to jail, and almost nobody is, for possessing and smoking small amounts of marijuana. In Alaska, you can grow quite a few plants in your own home. You can consume in your own home.
My co-host Wajahad Ali is here. He's bringing in all of your live social media, as usual, into the program. Waj, a number of people, including one of our guests tonight, believe that if the current approach to legalizing marijuana doesn't change, we could have a public health crisis on our hands.
Indeed, but more Americans are inhaling, and our community is buzzing about tonight's show. I promise no more puns.
Please,
I had to get that out of the way.
Please, okay, you're killing me.
I had to do it. But before about the consequences, Suzanne says she sees a weed Narnia, a weed utopia happening. She goes, it will be legal, sold like fine wine or Cuban cigars, and a great source of revenue. There will be bars and cafes. However, on the flip side, David says, criminalization isn't a solution to addiction. A big problem, Lisa. The rich and middle class get treatment, and a lot of people are also tweeting in about the effects it will have on children.
Yeah, worrying if it will increase addiction among kids. Colorado and Washington were the first two states to greenlight the sale of marijuana for recreational use, and now, from Kentucky to Arizona, a number of others may be following in their path. But is there a right way and a wrong way to go about this, as entrepreneurs look to capitalize on what promises to be a very lucrative industry? Some argue that in the race to buy and sell drugs legally, regulation and oversight are mere afterthoughts, leaving open the possibility of a public health crisis as one of the unintended consequences. Joining us to help talk this through is Cheryl Schumann, a marijuana entrepreneur and self-described Martha Stewart of marijuana. Mark Kleiman is a professor of public policy at UCLA and the author of Marijuana Legalization, What Everyone Needs to Know. Mark's written extensively on this topic. And Michael Gordon is the CEO of Kush Tourism. That is Seattle's first company to provide marijuana tours. Thanks to everyone for being here. So Cheryl, you look at the trends, you look at the polls, and it is really true. A lot of people do believe that it's just a when, it's not an if. Some people estimate in the next decade or two. From your perspective, where is this conversation at right now in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's actually going to happen much sooner than people realize. It's my belief that by 2016, we're going to be
Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Marijuana legalization. Many believe it's not a question of if, but when. But is taking it off the streets and putting it in the stores really safer and better?